Picture a city built on a fault line that nobody can see. Now fill it with electric light, jazz horns, and a police force that keeps a paragraph of law folded in its breast pocket like a loaded pistol. Add cigarette smoke thick enough to chew, cheap gin dressed up as champagne, and a kind of freedom so new and so fragile that everyone enjoying it can feel, underneath the music, exactly how easily it could be taken away. That's Berlin. Magnificent and merciless. A place where you could walk past a church reciting hymns in the morning and walk into a cellar reciting code words by midnight. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists gawking at the cabaret posters, we're living it. One door, one password, one terrified swallow before you knock. Everything you would have smelled, feared, and survived. I make these stories so you can sleep, and I genuinely don't know if anyone does, or if you're all just curious about how dangerous it used to be to simply want what you wanted. Either way, subscribe if it suits you. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your hand is shaking before you even reach the door. Not from cold, though the late October air bites at your knuckles where your gloves have worn through at the seams. It's the knock itself. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. That's the rhythm someone taught you 4 months ago in a voice barely above a whisper, in a stairwell that smelled of boiled cabbage and coal dust. And if you get it wrong, if you knock like a normal person knocks, eager and even, the little brass slot in the door simply will not open. No explanation, no second chance. Just a door that stays a door, and you standing in the alley like an idiot in the cold, while somewhere above you a window curtain twitches and somebody decides whether you're a customer or a problem. You knock it right. 3, pause, 2. The slot slides open with a sound like a coin dropping into a tin cup. A pair of eyes appears in the gap, ringed with coal so dark it looks like a wound. They look at you. Then at the carnation pinned to your lapel. White, not red, because red means something else entirely, and you learned that the hard way 3 weeks ago and nearly got thrown back out onto Kleiststrasse for your trouble. Name, the eyes say. Not a question, a test. Felix, you say. Then, because you remember the second half of the ritual just in time, tell the Countess that her nephew from Breslau has arrived. There is no Countess. There is no nephew. This is the whole point. The slot closes. Bolts move on the other side, 3 of them, each one louder than the last because the door is reinforced with iron plate behind the wood. A fact you only learned the night the police actually came and you watched, from a gap in the curtain upstairs, as 4 constables threw their shoulders into a door that simply refused to be a door for them either. By the time it opens for you tonight, your heart is going hard enough that you can feel it in your teeth. You step inside, and the cold of Berlin in autumn is replaced all at once by heat and smoke and brass. This is Henry's history for sleep, and tonight you're not waking up anywhere. Tonight you're already awake, already 19 years old, already 4 months into a life you didn't know existed before you arrived in this city, with a single suitcase and a letter of introduction to a cousin who, as it turned out, wanted nothing to do with you the moment he understood what kind of nephew had shown up on his doorstep. But that's a different story. Tonight you're at work. The room beyond the door is not large, perhaps 40 feet by 20, low-ceilinged, lit by paper lanterns strung between iron pipes that someone has painted gold so they look, in the dim light, almost elegant. A piano in the corner is being played by a woman in a man's dinner jacket, her cigarette balanced on the key's edge between phrases, and around small round tables crowded so close together that waiters have to turn sideways to pass between them. Perhaps 60 people are doing what they came here to do, which is, more than anything else, simply being themselves for a few hours without flinching. You smell it before you fully see it. Cigarette smoke, obviously, layered 3 or 4 kinds deep. Cheap tobacco, expensive tobacco, and underneath both of those the sweetish reek of something rolled that isn't tobacco at all. Spilled gin faintly. The particular hot metal smell of a coal stove working too hard in a room with no proper ventilation. Perfume. 4 or 5 different bottles fighting each other in the air. Lavender and something floral and something that smells expensive enough that you wonder, not for the first time, exactly whose money built this place. And under all of it, the smell of nervous human bodies packed close together in a country where the law says some of those bodies aren't allowed to want what they want. That smell never quite leaves the room, no matter how much perfume gets poured on top of it. Welcome to the El Dorado's smaller, dirtier cousin, a tea room with no sign, no listing, and no name that's ever written down anywhere except in the memories of the people who are trusted to find it. Your name is Felix Brandt. You're 19 years old, and you arrived here from a village outside Breslau 7 months ago, with exactly 1 suitcase, 11 Reichsmarks, and a vague hope that Berlin would let you be someone other than the person your father had already decided you would never be. Back home, everyone said Berlin would either save you or ruin you. They weren't wrong about either possibility. A clock somewhere behind the bar strikes 10, muffled by the piano and the talk and the clink of glasses, and you go to work. Your job here has a real name on the books if anyone ever asked, which nobody does. You are officially nothing. Unofficially, you are the boy who runs the coats, reads the room, and watches the door from the inside while old Conrad watches it from the outside. You do this 6 nights a week, from 9 in the evening till whenever the last unsteady customer has been poured into a taxi, or walked home by a friend sober enough to manage it, which some nights is 2 in the morning, and other nights is closer to 5. The woman who runs this place is called, by everyone who has ever set foot inside, simply Tante Magda. Whether that is her real name, you have never asked, and you understand by now that you never will. She is somewhere past 50, built like a woman who used to box for money and possibly still could, with a voice that can drop a room to silence with 2 words and a laugh that can fill it back up again with 1. She wears men's trousers under a woman's evening jacket, smokes cigars when she's in a mood to make a point, and has, taped to the underside of the bar where only she can reach it, a small leather ledger that she will burn without hesitation the moment she hears the wrong kind of footsteps on the stairs outside. She found you in your 2nd week in Berlin, half-starved and sleeping in a doorway 2 streets from here, after a different sort of establishment had decided you weren't worth paying, and a different sort of man has decided you might be worth something else entirely. She didn't ask you what had happened. She simply looked at you the way you imagine a butcher looks at a side of meat, assessing, not unkind, and said, "Can you keep your mouth shut and your eyes open?" You said yes. You've spent every night since proving it. The first thing you learn, she told you, that first week, in the empty hour before the doors opened, while she counted bottles behind the bar with the quick practice fingers of someone who's been robbed before and doesn't intend to be robbed again, is that nothing in this room means what it says. You'll hear people order a coffee with cream and they mean nothing by it except that they want coffee with cream. You'll hear someone else order the exact same thing in the exact same words and they mean something entirely different. Your job is to learn the difference without ever once asking out loud which is which. She showed you the flowers first. A white carnation worn on the left meant you belonged. You were known. You could be trusted with the door. A white carnation on the right meant the same thing, but signalled you were also looking for company tonight, not just shelter. A violet meant something gentler, admirers of women loving women, a smaller and even more careful circle within the larger careful circle. Women who came here in pairs and left in pairs, and whose safety, Tante Magda made very clear, was not negotiable under any circumstances, not for any amount of money, not for any policeman's smile. A red carnation, she told you, her voice going flat and serious in a way you hadn't heard from her before, meant a man who was new, untested, possibly sent. Red means careful, she said. Red means watch him all night and tell nobody anything they don't already know. Then there was the language itself, which took you longer to learn than the flowers. A man wasn't a man here, not in conversation that mattered. He was a schwuler if you trusted the company, a Tante if you wanted gentleness in the word, a word so ordinary sounding that a policeman standing 2 feet away might hear it and think only of someone's actual aunt. A woman who loved women called herself, among friends, by words borrowed half from French and half from nowhere at all, words invented specifically because the existing ones in German law carried prison sentences attached to them like a tail to a dog. Paragraph 175. You learned those 3 words and that one number before you learned almost anything else about this city, because Tante Magda made sure of it, sitting you down on your 4th night with a small glass of schnapps you hadn't asked for and didn't particularly want. Paragraph 175 of the Criminal Code, she said, makes what happens between 2 men a crime, has done since before either of us was born. It does not technically criminalize what happens between 2 women, and don't ask me to explain the logic of men who write laws, because there isn't any. What it means in practice is that every man in this room tonight is breaking the law simply by being here, simply by wanting what he wants, and if the wrong policeman walks through that door at the wrong moment, half this room could spend the next several years somewhere considerably less pleasant than this cellar. Does that happen? You asked. Often? Often enough, she said, that we have 3 exits, 2 of which you don't know about yet, and a system for clearing this room in under 90 seconds that you're going to learn tonight, because I am tired of you standing by the coats like a particularly handsome piece of furniture. You learned it that night. You have used it twice since. What you do, most nights, is simpler than all of that, even if the simplicity sits on top of all that danger like icing on a cake nobody asked to be reminded was poisoned. You take coats. You hang them on numbered pegs in a back room that smells of wet wool and cologne, and you remember, without writing anything down, exactly which peg belongs to which face, because written records are the one thing Tante Magda will not permit in this building under any circumstances. You watch the door from inside while Conrad, 70 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a war nobody talks about anymore, and possessed of a hearing so sharp he can identify a policeman's tread on cobblestones from 40 feet away, watches it from outside, smoking cigarette after cigarette in the doorway of the bakery across the alley, ready to give one long whistle that means customers and one short, sharp, double whistle. That means something else entirely, something that turns Tante Magda's face to stone and sends you running for the back room to start unhooking coats from their pegs as fast as your hands will move. Tonight, so far, there have been no whistles at all, just the piano and the smoke, and the particular electric hum of a room full of people allowing themselves for a few hours to stop performing the lives the law insists they live during daylight. You take a coat from a tall man with a moustache waxed to 2 perfect points, hang it on peg 14, and hand him a small brass token in exchange. He winks at you. You don't wink back. Tante Magda was very clear about that on your first night, with a single sentence that has stuck with you ever since. You're not here to be looked at, Felix. You're here to make sure everyone else can be. You go back to the door. There's an afternoon in December, before the raid, before any of that, when Tante Magda sends you on an errand that takes you somewhere grander than anywhere you've been since arriving in this city. I need you to collect something from the El Dorado, she says, counting coins into a small purse and pressing it into your hand. Ask for Herr Bauer at the side entrance. He's expecting you. And Felix, wear your good collar. Even the errand boys are expected to look presentable when they walk through that door. You've heard of the El Dorado the way everyone in this part of the city has heard of it, the way a country boy might hear of a cathedral before ever seeing one. It isn't hidden behind a coded knock or a carnation worn just so. It has a proper sign, electric bulb spelling out its name above the entrance, and on any given night a line of motor cars idling at the curb while doormen in actual uniform, not Conrad's bakery doorway, not iron plate bolted behind plain wood, wave through a clientele that includes, depending on which rumour you believe, actresses, foreign journalists, the occasional curious aristocrat slipping in under an assumed name for the thrill of being somewhere his own circle would never approve of. You arrive in the grey hour of mid-afternoon, when the great cabaret is empty of its usual crowd, the electric sign overhead unlit and oddly ordinary in daylight, like a stage actor caught backstage without his makeup. The side entrance Herr Bauer mentioned is around a narrow lane behind the building, and a uniformed doorman there, younger than you expected, with the bored, watchful face of someone who has long since stopped being impressed by anyone who comes through this particular door, lets you in without much ceremony once you give Tante Magda's name. Inside, by daylight and without its crowd, the El Dorado is enormous in a way the cellar never is. The main hall could swallow Tante Magda's entire establishment 3 or 4 times over, with a proper stage at one end, footlights dark now, and tier upon tier of small round tables stretching back into shadow. Cleaning women move between them with mops and buckets, and a man in shirt sleeves is up on a ladder adjusting one of the great chandeliers, its crystal drops catching what little grey light filters through high windows near the ceiling. Herr Bauer turns out to be a tall, soft-spoken man in his middle years, dressed even at this idle hour with a precision that makes your own good collar feel suddenly inadequate. He leads you through a back corridor lined with framed photographs, performers you half recognise from posters plastered around the city, men in evening gowns and women in tailored suits, all of them smiling out at you with the particular confidence of people who have found, here at least, a stage built specifically to let them be seen exactly as they are. You work for Magda, he says, not quite a question, leading you toward a small office. She speaks well of you. She's taught me most of what I know about this city, sir. He smiles at that faintly. She taught half of us one way or another. This place, he gestures at the corridor, the photographs, the great dark hall beyond, exists partly because Magda Steiner refused to be quiet 20 years ago, when refusing to be quiet was a much more dangerous business than it is even now. Some of us got to build something larger out of her stubbornness. Most of what she runs stays small and careful, because small and careful is what survives. We took a different gamble, bigger, brighter, harder to shut down quietly, because shutting us down quietly would draw exactly the kind of attention nobody in this city's government particularly wants drawn to itself. He hands you a thick envelope, Money, you assume, though you don't ask, and a smaller package wrapped in brown paper that you later learn contains sheet music Tante Magda has been wanting for her own piano player, songs the Eldorado's house composer wrote, and that nowhere else in the city will sell openly. Tell her, Herr Bauer says, walking you back toward the side door, that the talk among the bigger houses is the same talk she's likely already hearing from smaller corners. Things are tightening. Tell her to keep her exits clear and her ledger ready to burn. You don't fully understand that afternoon how soon you'll need that exact warning. You simply nod, the way you've learned to nod at warnings you don't yet have the context to be properly afraid of, and step back out into the narrow lane, the great dark cabaret falling silent and ordinary behind you once the door swings shut. You think walking back toward Kleiststrasse with the envelope tucked against your ribs the same way you'll carry Hutmacher's payment a few weeks later, about the strange architecture of safety in this city, how some of it is built loud and bright and impossible to ignore, daring the authorities to make an example of something so visible, and how some of it is built small and quiet and hidden behind a coded knock, betting instead on never being noticed at all. 2 different gambles, Herr Bauer called them. You wonder, walking home through the grey afternoon, which gamble actually pays off in the end, or whether, in a city like this one, neither gamble ever quite finishes paying out at all. Whether the house, whoever the house turns out to be, always eventually calls in everything it's owed. On your way back from the Eldorado, with the light already starting to fail and the December cold settling deeper into your fingers, you pass a cafe on the corner of a wide boulevard that you've walked past a dozen times without ever once going inside. It isn't hidden behind anything. Quite the opposite. Broad windows fogged with the warmth of bodies inside, gold lettering on the glass spelling out a name you half recognize from newspaper advertisements, and through the haze of condensation you can see a room packed with small marble-topped tables, every one of them occupied. A low roar of conversation audible even out here on the freezing pavement. You don't have money to spend on coffee you don't need. But Herr Bauer's warning is still sitting heavy in your pocket alongside the envelope, and something about the warmth and the noise pulls you toward the door anyway, just for a few minutes, just to see. Inside, the smell hits you first, the way it always does. Coffee, dense and bitter, layered under a haze of pipe and cigarette smoke thick enough to soften the electric lights into something almost golden. Wet wool from 100 coats steaming gently as their owners thaw out. And underneath all of it, paper, newspaper ink, the particular dry smell of pages turned quickly by impatient fingers. This, you realize within a minute of standing just inside the door, is where the city actually finds out what it thinks. Every table seems to have its own stack of newsprint, some patrons reading 4 or 5 different papers at once, switching between them with the quick comparative attention of men checking whether one editor's version of events matches another's. A heated argument is underway 2 tables over. Something about the new Chancellor and whether the latest emergency decree oversteps the Constitution, conducted with the kind of passionate precision that suggests both men have read the relevant clause of the Constitution more than once. Near the back, a cluster of younger men and women, students, by the look of their threadbare good coats, are passing a single typed manuscript between them, reading sections aloud in low voices and arguing about a word choice with the same intensity the men near the door are bringing to constitutional law. You catch a fragment of it as you pass, something about cities and ash and the particular loneliness of crowds, and you wonder briefly what it would feel like to have words matter that much to anyone, to argue over a single sentence as if the whole shape of the world depended on getting it exactly right. A waiter in a long apron moves between the tables with the harried efficiency of a man who's been on his feet since dawn, and he gives you the same look the serving girl at any tavern gives a customer who clearly isn't going to order anything. Not unkind exactly, but pointed enough that you understand your welcome here has a clock attached to it. You linger only a few minutes longer, long enough to overhear one piece of conversation that makes the cold walk home feel considerably colder. Two men near the window, neither of whom you recognise, are discussing, quietly, but not quietly enough, a list of addresses that the Vice Division has apparently been compiling for months, cross-referenced against complaints from landlords and neighbours, building towards something larger than the occasional raid on a single cellar. One of the men says a number, low, almost embarrassed to say it out loud, and the other one whistles softly through his teeth and changes the subject to football instead, the way men do when a topic has become too heavy to keep holding in open conversation. You don't know, standing there in your damp coat with Herr Bauer's envelope against your ribs, whether that list includes Tante Magda's address. You don't know whether it includes yours. But you know, walking back out into the cold a few minutes later, that information moves through this city exactly the way Tante Magda once told you it did during your very first week. Fast, and largely true, and almost always arriving in a coded cellar an hour or two after it's already been spoken aloud in a brightly lit cafe where nobody bothered to use a code at all. You walk the rest of the way back to Kleiststrasse faster than you need to, the envelope and the warning both feeling, by the time you reach the bakery doorway, considerably heavier than they did when you first picked them up. Tante Magda gives you a rare night off in early December. The cellar closed for a private function. She doesn't explain and you don't ask about. And Ernst, delighted at having you free on an evening that matches his own, insists on taking you somewhere he's been promising for weeks. Not your cellar, he says, pulling on his coat. Somewhere louder, somewhere with cards. The place he leads you to is nothing like Tante Magda's careful, coded world. It's a workingmen's tavern 2 streets behind the print shop. No carnations required, no knock to get right. Just a door that swings open onto noise and warmth the moment you push it. The room is low-ceilinged and packed, blackened by decades of pipe smoke, every table occupied by men playing cards or dominoes, or simply drinking with the particular focused seriousness of people determined to forget, for one evening, exactly how thin their wallets have grown since October. Ernst knows half the room, it seems, slapping backs and exchanging greetings as he steers you toward a table near the stove where a card game is already running. "This is Felix," he announces. "Be gentle with him." The men at the table size you up with the brief practice glance of regulars assessing fresh money. A printer with ink permanently stained into the creases of his knuckles. A man who might be a dock worker or might be something less legal, hard to tell in the dim light. The game is simple enough to pick up within a few hands, small stakes, a pfennig or 2 at a time, and you lose steadily but not catastrophically across the first hour, the warmth of the stove and the cheap beer making the losses feel, for a little while, almost pleasant. You're down more than you'd like by the time you push back from the table, watching Ernst settle in for the long haul, his face lit with the particular concentration of a man who's actually rather good at reading when the printer is bluffing. You take your beer to the bar instead, watching the room the way Tante Magda taught you to watch any room, not staring, never quite looking away either. A fiddler in the corner is attempting a tune that keeps sliding out of key. drunker than his instrument can forgive. Two women near the door are arguing about money in voices that rise and fall with practiced rhythm, clearly an old argument worn smooth from repetition. And threaded through all of it, a smell you've started recognizing without needing anyone to point it out anymore, the sharp, juniper bitter smell of cheap schnapps being poured for men who've already had more than they should. Men whose hands shake faintly around their glasses, whose eyes have gone glassy in a way that has nothing to do with simple tiredness. Bad winter coming, the man beside you at the bar says, apparently to nobody in particular, staring into his own glass. Factory let half of us go before Christmas. Half. Just like that. 20 years I gave that place. Nobody answers him. He doesn't seem to expect anyone to. You finish your beer slowly, thinking about Tante Magda's careful ledger taped beneath her bar, about the rise in prices Hutmacher complains of every time you hand him his envelope, about the newspaper columns of unemployment figures growing longer week by week. The desperation in this room isn't the same desperation you've learned to read in the cellar. Nobody here is afraid of a knock at the door for who they love. But it's desperation all the same, and you're starting to understand. Watching this room of tired men drinking away wages they don't have to spare, that this city's troubles don't sort themselves neatly into separate categories. They all draw from the same well of fear, just dressed in different clothes depending on which corner of the city you happen to be standing in. A man slides onto the stool beside you, well dressed for this particular room, his coat too fine for the company, his eyes too watchful for an honest tradesman. "You're new here," he says, not quite a question. "Visiting? My friends playing cards?" He studies you for a moment longer than is comfortable. You've got careful eyes, the kind that notice things. I could use a young man with careful eyes time to time. Pays better than whatever you're doing now. I'm not looking for other work. Everyone's looking for other work these days. You'll change your mind eventually. Most do. He doesn't push further, just slides a small card across the bar with a name and no address, and drifts off into the crowd before you can decide whether to take it or leave it sitting there. You leave it sitting there. But you remember his face, the way Tante Magda taught you to remember faces in case it ever turns out to matter. Ernst finds you an hour later, slightly poorer but in good spirits, and the two of you walk back through streets gone properly dark, the lamps few and far between this far from the boulevards, your breath clouding in front of you with every step. Neither of you says much. There isn't much that needs saying. Walking home from an ordinary night in an increasingly uncertain city, two young men who've each, in their own separate corners of Berlin, learned exactly how thin the line runs between an evening's harmless entertainment and something considerably more dangerous waiting just one bad decision away. Around midnight, with the room at its loudest and the piano player 3 drinks past sober, Tante Magda catches your sleeve as you pass and pulls you toward the small office behind the bar, no bigger than a closet, papered with playbills for cabarets that no longer exist. "I need you to go to Hutmacher tonight," she says low, even though the door is shut and the music outside would swallow a shout. "Before 1, he'll be at the usual corner." Your stomach drops the way it always does when she says that name. Hutmacher isn't a person's name. Not really. It's what everyone calls him. A joke nobody finds funny, because the man in question wears a different hat every time you see him, as if changing hats might let him pretend he's a different man each time he takes money to look the other way. He is a sergeant with the Vice Division, and twice a month an envelope finds its way from Tante Magda's hand to his, and in exchange, This particular cellar gets warned an hour before any raid that might otherwise catch it by surprise. It is not a kind arrangement. It is not even strictly a safe one. There is nothing stopping Houtmacher from taking the money and the warning system both, and selling you out the moment a more ambitious officer offers him something better. But it is the arrangement you have, and tonight it is your job to carry it. She presses an envelope into your hand. It's thicker than you expect, and heavier, the paper slightly damp from her own palm. Don't open it, she says, which she says every time as if you would. Don't run. Running makes you look like exactly what you are. Walk like a boy going home from a normal evening at a normal job, and if anyone stops you, you sell newspapers for the morning edition, and you're hurrying because your editor will dock your pay if you're late. I don't have any newspapers, you point out. Then you'd better hope nobody asks to see them. You step out the back way, through Conrad's bakery doorway, and the cold hits you like a slap after the heated air of the cellar. Kleiststrasse at this hour is its own kind of chaos. Nothing like the orderly daylit street where respectable Berliners do respectable shopping. Now it belongs to a different city entirely, one that only exists between sundown and sunrise. Street lamps throw cones of weak yellow light onto wet cobblestones, and between those cones the dark is real dark, the kind that swallows detail. Figures move through it in every direction, men in evening dress weaving home from theatres, women selling cigarettes from trays slung around their necks, a trio of soldiers, still in uniform though the war that uniform belonged to ended a decade ago, laughing too loudly at something none of them will remember by morning. A man sleeps in a doorway with newspaper stuffed under his coat for warmth, and nobody steps around him so much as steps over him, automatic, practiced, the way you might step over a crack in the pavement. You walk fast, the envelope pressed flat against your ribs under your own coat, and you keep your eyes moving the way Conrad taught you. Never staring, never quite looking away either, cataloguing faces the way Tante Magda catalogues bottles. A woman with too much rouge and not enough coat falls into step beside you for half a block. Looking for company, sweetheart? Her breath smells of peppermint schnapps, badly disguising something stronger underneath. Workin', you say, which is true, and she peels off without complaint, already turning her attention toward a better-dressed man 20 feet behind you. 2 streets on, the chaos changes character. This is closer to Alexanderplatz, and the crowd here is rougher. Dock workers and factory men just off shift, unemployed men who've been drinking away severance pay that won't last the month. A knot of young toughs in matching caps who eye you the way dogs eye a smaller dog, deciding whether you're worth the trouble. You've learned, these past months, exactly which knots of men to cross the street to avoid, and which ones will leave you alone if you simply keep your pace steady and your face blank. You cross the street. A tram rattles past, sparks hissing faintly off the overhead wire, lit windows full of tired faces heading home from late shifts or toward early ones. Somewhere behind you, glass breaks. A bottle, probably, against a wall, followed by laughter that could be friendly or could be the opposite. And you don't turn around to find out which. The corner where Houtmacher waits is 2 blocks further, beside a shuttered tobacco kiosk that does its real business, you suspect, after the legitimate one closes. He's wearing tonight a grey Homburg with a small feather tucked into the band, an affectation that would be almost charming on a man who wasn't doing what he does. Evening, he says, not looking at you directly, his gaze sliding instead across the empty street behind you, checking, always checking whether anyone is watching the watcher. You hand him the envelope, He weighs it in his palm without opening it, the way a butcher weighs meat, the way Tante Magda once weighed you. Tell your Tante, he says, tucking it inside his coat in one smooth motion, that there's noise coming from above. New district commander, wants numbers, arrests, specifically, not warnings. The old way of doing business might not last the winter. Your mouth goes dry. What does that mean for us? He looks at you properly for the first time, and there's something almost like pity in his face, which is worse somehow than if there'd been nothing at all. It means enjoy the cellar while it's still standing, boy. Things like this don't last forever. Nothing in this city does. He tips the absurd hat just slightly. Tell her I'll send word if I hear a date. He walks off into the dark, and you stand there a moment longer than you should, the cold finding its way through the gap in your gloves, before you turn and start the walk back, the warning sitting in your chest like a swallowed stone. You don't get all the way back. A hand closes on your shoulder 2 streets from the cellar, in a stretch of road where the nearest lamp has burned out and nobody has bothered to replace it. You spin, fists already half raised the way Conrad taught you, but the man behind you isn't reaching for a weapon. He's smiling, and somehow that's worse. Felix Brandt, he says, and your whole body goes cold in a way that has nothing to do with the night air, because you have never told this man your name, have never, to your knowledge, told this man anything at all. He's perhaps 40, well-dressed in a way that doesn't quite fit the street he's standing on, his coat collar turned up against the cold, a cigarette unlit between 2 fingers, as if he's been waiting for you specifically and didn't want to waste the tobacco standing around. There's something familiar in the shape of his face that you can't immediately place, and that not placing frightens you more than recognition would have. I don't know you, you say, and your voice comes out steadier than you feel, which is its own small victory. No, he agrees pleasantly, but I know you. I know which cellar you just came from, and which one you're walking back to, and I know the gentleman in the grey hat you were just speaking with, though I doubt his superiors know half of what I know about him. Sergeant Hutmacher has expensive taste for a man of his salary. Your mind is moving fast now, cycling through everything Tante Magda has taught you about men like this. There is a word for what he is. A word that gets passed between the regulars at the cellar in low, frightened voices. Erpresser, blackmailer. A particular kind of predator that has grown up alongside the particular kind of freedom Berlin allows after dark. Men who learn names and faces and addresses specifically so they can be sold back to the people who'd rather pay than be exposed. I have 11 marks, you say, which is roughly true, and you're welcome to them. But I don't think you're going to find that satisfying, he laughs, a short, genuine sound. I don't want your 11 marks, boy. I'm not interested in you at all, as it happens. You're a coat check runner. You've got nothing worth threatening. I want a name, a regular, someone with a family, a position, something to lose. You hand the coats every night. You see who comes and goes better than anyone in that building except the old woman behind the bar, and she's harder to get at than you are. I don't know what you're talking about. You do. There's a gentleman who comes on Thursdays. Tall, grey at the temples, expensive shoes that don't match the rest of him, like he changed his clothes somewhere before he arrived so the cab driver wouldn't talk. I've seen him twice now, and I can't get close enough inside to learn his name. You could. Your hands have curled into fists inside your coat pockets, nails biting into your own palms, because you know exactly who he means. You've hung that man's coat yourself on peg number 6 3 Thursdays running, and you know. because Tante Magda made certain every single person working for her knew that the man in question is a city councilman with a wife and 2 children, and a position that a single whisper in the right newspaper office could destroy entirely. I take coats, you say. I don't ask names. People who come to that cellar don't give names. That's rather the point of it. Everyone gives something away eventually. A handkerchief with initials, an address muttered to a cab driver while you're standing close enough to hear. You'll learn something sooner or later, whether you mean to or not, and when you do... He finally lights the cigarette, cupping the match against a wind that isn't really blowing, an unhurried gesture that makes your skin crawl worse than any threat could. You're going to remember that I found you easily enough tonight, in the dark, on a street you walk twice a week. I'll find you again, and the price of your own silence, when the time comes, is going to be exactly the information I'm asking you for now, except by then it'll cost you considerably more than a name. He drops the spent match onto the cobblestones, grinds it out with his heel in a motion almost delicate, and walks off without waiting for an answer, his pace unhurried. A man who has all the time in the world, because time, in his particular line of work, is the one thing that's always on his side. You stand there shaking for longer than you'd like to admit, your breath coming in short clouds that the cold turns visible, and then you run the rest of the way back, abandoning every piece of advice Tante Magda ever gave you about running, because right now you don't care what you look like. You only care about getting back behind that iron-plated door. Conrad sees your face when you come through the bakery doorway and doesn't ask. He simply reaches out and grips your shoulder once. Hard. The missing fingers on his left hand pressing strangely against your collarbone, and says, "Inside. Tell her everything. All of it. Even the parts that frighten you to say out loud. She needs the whole picture, or she can't protect anyone." You tell her everything. Her face as you speak goes through several expressions you've never seen on it before. Alarm, then something colder and more calculating. Then by the time you finish, a stillness that frightens you more than any of it. Councilman Vogt, she says finally, not a question. Just confirming what you'd both already understood without either of you saying his name aloud. Of course it's him. Man like that. He thinks expensive shoes make him invisible. She pours you a schnapps you don't ask for, the second one this week, and pushes it across the bar with 2 fingers. You did right, coming straight to me. You did exactly right. What happens now? She doesn't answer right away. Outside, the piano starts up again, someone having coaxed the drunk player back to the keys, and the ordinary noise of the cellar continues around you both, as if nothing at all has changed, even though something clearly has. "Now," she says eventually, "we warn Vogt quietly, and we hope he's smart enough to stop coming on Thursdays for a while. And you, Felix, you don't walk that street alone after dark again. Not for a long while. Maybe not ever. You don't sleep well that night. In the narrow room above a print shop 2 streets over that you share with another young man named Ernst, who works the door at a different establishment entirely and asks no questions about your hours because his own are just as strange. You lie awake listening to the building settle, to a dog barking somewhere distant, to your own heartbeat refusing to slow down, and you think for the first time since arriving in this city that perhaps Berlin's freedom and Berlin's danger aren't 2 separate things at all. Perhaps they're the exact same thing, wearing 2 different hats, the way Hutmacher wears his. The week after, the man with the unlit cigarette finds you in the dark passes slowly, the way weeks do when you're waiting for something bad to happen and it simply doesn't, not yet, leaving you with nothing to do but carry the waiting around in your chest like a stone you can't put down. And then Sunday comes, and Tante Magda, of all people, is the one who tells you to leave the city behind for an afternoon. "You're no use to me jumping at shadows," she says, not unkindly, pressing a few coins into your palm before you can argue. "Go somewhere with air in it, somewhere you can see further than the end of an alley." Ernst, your roommate, knows exactly where that somewhere should be. "The tower," he says, lacing his boots, "out past West End, opened a few years back. You can see the whole city from the top, all the way to the forests on a clear day. Costs almost nothing if you don't mind the stairs." You don't mind the stairs. After 4 months of standing in a windowless coat room half the night, you find you don't mind anything that involves moving your legs in daylight. The tram ride out takes nearly an hour, rattling past districts you've never had reason to visit. Ordinary Berlin going about its ordinary Sunday. Families in their good clothes walking to church, children chasing a dog across a square, a flower seller setting out chrysanthemums in buckets on a corner that has nothing to hide and nothing to fear. You watch it all through the window with a strange, almost homesick feeling, as if you're looking at a country you used to live in. The tower itself rises out of the exhibition grounds like something built by people who decided deliberately that the future ought to look like a steel cathedral. Riveted girders climb in a narrowing lattice toward a small platform you can barely make out from the ground, over 100 meters up, and a thin antenna mast continuing even higher above that, sending whatever invisible signals radio towers send out across a city that can't see them. You pay your fare and climb into the lift, which groans and shudders in a way that makes Ernst grip the rail with both hands, and the two of you rise in near silence, the ground falling away beneath your feet in a manner that makes your stomach lurch pleasantly, the way it used to when you were small enough to be swung by your arms. The platform at the top is open to the wind, ringed by a railing that suddenly feels thinner than you'd like, and the cold up here is sharper than the cold at street level, carrying none of the city's smoke with it, just clean autumn air that smells faintly of pine from somewhere far below. And then you look out, and the whole of Berlin spreads beneath you like something poured rather than built. The river curves through the heart of it, dull silver under a sky gone the colour of old pewter. You can pick out the dome of the cathedral, the long straight cut of Unter den Linden, the dense huddle of rooftops in the eastern districts where chimneys smoke without pause even on a Sunday. Somewhere down there, invisible from this height, is a street with a bakery doorway and an iron-plated door behind it, and a man in a grey hat who might, right now, be deciding whether his loyalty to an envelope of money outweighs his loyalty to whoever signs his actual wages. From up here, none of it looks dangerous. It looks like a toy city, beautiful and orderly, smoke rising in lazy threads from 1,000 chimneys, trams sliding along their tracks like beads on wire. An old man is standing further along the platform, alone, leaning on a cane and looking out in the same direction you are, and after a while he speaks without turning his head, the way men do when they've spent a long life talking to strangers on trains and benches and battlefields. First time up? Yes, sir. Thought so. You've got the look. Like the city surprised you by being beautiful. He's perhaps 70, his coat a decade out of fashion, a small enamel pin on his lapel that you recognise, with a small jolt, as a regimental badge from the war. I came up here the first month it opened, and I haven't quite stopped coming back. Once a month, when my knees allow the stairs to the lift. Were you a soldier, sir? 4 years of it. Verdun, then further east, then places I've tried very hard to forget the names of. He taps his cane lightly against the railing. Lost my brother out there. Lost most of the men I trained with. Came home to a city that didn't know what to do with men who'd been taught nothing but how to survive things. Nobody should have to survive. You don't know what to say to that, so you say nothing, and he seems to expect exactly that, because he simply keeps talking, his eyes on the horizon. You know what I notice up here, boy? Every single person down there thinks their particular trouble is the only trouble in the world. The shopkeeper worried about his rent. The girl worried about a boy who doesn't love her back. The fellow worried about a debt or a secret or a knock on the door he's been dreading. He turns, finally, and looks at you properly, and there's nothing unkind in his face, only a kind of weathered understanding that makes you wonder, absurdly, whether he somehow already knows exactly what kind of secret a boy your age might be carrying around this city. From up here, you can't see any of those troubles at all. Just smoke and rooftops and a river that doesn't care about any of it. Sometimes that's worth the price of admission, just to remember the troubles are smaller than they feel. Does it work, you ask? Does it actually make them smaller? He considers this for a long moment, watching a barge make its slow way along the river far below. No, he says eventually, almost gently. Not really, but it lets you breathe for an hour, and an hour of breathing is not nothing when the rest of your week doesn't allow for it. Take what you can get, boy. This city doesn't hand out comfort generously. You learn to gather it in small amounts wherever you find it, and you carry it back down with you. He tips his hat, the same small, formal gesture you noticed in Hutmacher days ago, though it means something entirely different coming from this man, and makes his slow way back toward the lift, his cane tapping against the iron grating. You stay a while longer, the wind pulling at your coat, Ernst beside you eating a roll he bought from a vendor at the base of the tower, and you try to do what the old soldier suggested, to look at the smoke and the rooftops and let the river's indifference become, for just this hour, your own. It works a little, not entirely, but a little, you're starting to understand, is sometimes the whole of what a city like this is willing to give you, and you've learned these past months to be grateful for whatever you get. The light starts to fail before you're ready for it, the way it does in late October, and you make your way back down the long lattice of steel, back into the city that's waiting for you, with all its smoke and all its danger and all its strange, fragile beauty intact. After the tower, something in you settles, the way a fever breaks without you quite noticing the exact moment it happens. The weeks turn into a month, and the month turns into 2. You learn the cellar's rhythms so well they stop feeling like things you're learning and start feeling like things you simply know, the way you know the weight of your own hand. You can tell, now, within seconds of a stranger's knock, whether the rhythm is right or whether it's someone who learned the pattern second-hand and is performing it badly, a half-beat too eager. You can read a room from the coat pegs alone. 14 coats hung means a slow night, gentle and easy. 40 coats hung and still arriving means the kind of crowded, electric evening where Tante Magda will need every pair of hands she has. Conrad teaches you to recognize a plainclothes officer by his shoes alone, because a man can change his coat and his hat and his walk, but very few men think to change their shoes. And a vice squad officer's boots are always, regulation issue underneath whatever civilian costume sits on top of them. You spot one yourself in early November, lingering too long near the bakery doorway, and Conrad gives the long whistle that means customer. Watch carefully, and the man, whoever he was, eventually moves on, never having come close enough to the door to test the knock he didn't know. The man with the unlit cigarette doesn't come back. Tante Magda warns Councilman Vogt quietly, as she said she would, and he stops coming on Thursdays, and for a while you let yourself believe the danger has simply drifted past you, the way bad weather sometimes does, threatening rain all afternoon and then blowing off towards some other district entirely. But the city itself is changing underneath all of it, in ways that have nothing to do with your particular cellar and everything to do with everyone in it. You notice it first in small things. A newspaper someone leaves on a table, open to a page where the unemployment figures sit printed in columns too long to read comfortably. Factories closing in the Ruhr. Banks in trouble after something that happened across the ocean in October that nobody quite understands the size of yet, except that everyone agrees, in low voices over coffee, that it is going to be very large indeed. Men who used to come to the cellar in good suits start coming in suits that have clearly been brushed and mended one too many times. The price of everything climbs week to week, in a way that makes Tante Magda's careful ledger, the one taped beneath the bar, grow tighter and more anxious in its arithmetic. And alongside the money trouble, something uglier starts showing itself on the streets after dark. You see your first brown shirt in late November, a young man not much older than yourself, handing out pamphlets on a corner near Alexanderplatz, with the particular swagger of someone who has finally found, in a movement and a uniform, an excuse for the cruelty he was probably always going to find an excuse for eventually. The pamphlet, when one is pressed into your hand against your will, talks about decadence and degeneracy and the corruption of German youth, and you recognise with a cold lurch in your stomach that the corruption it means is you, specifically, and everyone you spend your nights protecting. You stop walking past that corner. It isn't hard to avoid one corner in a city this size. But the feeling that comes with avoiding it doesn't stay contained to that one street, the way a stain doesn't stay contained to the spot where it first lands. It comes in waves, Tante Magda tells you one slow Tuesday night, when the cellar is quiet enough that the two of you can talk without shouting over the piano. She's polishing glasses with a cloth that's seen better decades, her cigar smoke curling up toward the gold-painted pipes overhead. I've seen it before, this particular tide. After the war, things got freer than anyone expected, faster than anyone was ready for, and there's always a current underneath that kind of freedom that hates it, hates how easy it looks, hates that it didn't get ours permission. Is it going to get worse? She doesn't answer right away, which is its own kind of answer. I don't know, Felix. I've run this place through inflation that made a loaf of bread cost more than this whole building used to be worth. I've run it through 3 different police commissioners, each one worse for us than the last, except for one brief, lovely fellow who genuinely didn't care what consenting adults did with their evenings, and who got replaced within the year for reasons that had nothing to do with us and everything to do with politics I don't fully understand. The tide goes in. The tide goes out. Right now, watching those boys with their pamphlets, watching the unemployment numbers, watching the way ordinary frightened people start looking for someone smaller than themselves to be frightened of instead, I think the tide is coming in. I don't think it's going out again soon. She sets down the glass she's been polishing and looks at you directly, in a way she rarely does, her usual brisk efficiency replaced for a moment by something almost tender. Whatever happens, you remember this place. You remember that for a little while, in a cellar with no name, a few dozen people got to be exactly who they were without apologizing for it. That's not nothing, even if it doesn't last, especially if it doesn't last. You don't fully understand that Tuesday night, how much weight those words are going to carry later. You simply nod and go back to your coats, and the winter deepens around the city the way it always does, indifferent to whatever is or isn't gathering in the dark beyond the lamplight. Hutmacher's warnings, when he sends them, grow shorter and more nervous over the following weeks. The new district commander he mentioned in November turns out to be exactly as ambitious as he predicted, and twice in December, Tante Magda closes the cellar entirely for a night on nothing more than a whispered rumour, costing herself a full evening's earnings rather than risk being wrong. Both nights pass without incident. The third time, in the second week of the new year, she doesn't get the warning at all. It's a Friday. The cellar fuller than usual because word has gone round that a singer from one of the bigger cabarets is coming to perform a late set for free, just for the pleasure of an audience that won't report her to anyone for the song she actually wants to sing. You've hung 63 coats by 11 o'clock, more than you've ever hung in a single night, and the room is loud and warm and for once entirely without dread in it, the political cold of the past weeks forgotten for a few hours inside all this brass and smoke and laughter. You're in the back room, straightening pegs, when Conrad's whistle comes through the wall. It isn't the long whistle. It isn't the short double whistle either, the one you've drilled and drilled until your body moves before your mind catches up. It's something else entirely. 3 short blasts in a row, frantic, a signal you've never actually heard outside of Tante Magda's description of it on your very first week, when she told you, almost as an afterthought, if you ever hear 3 short whistles, that means they're already here. Not coming. Here. Run the routine, don't think, just run it. Your body moves before your mind finishes processing the sound. You're out of the back room and into the main hall in 2 strides, and you can already hear it. Not a knock this time, not the polite fiction of a door that might or might not open. The sound from above is heavier than that. Boots on the outside stairs, a fist hammering the iron-plated door hard enough that the wood around the hinges groans, and a voice, amplified by a megaphone that makes it tinny and enormous at the same time, announcing that this is the police, that the building is surrounded, that everyone inside should remain calm and prepare to be questioned. The piano stops mid-phrase. For 1 full second, the entire room goes utterly silent, 60-odd people frozen mid-laugh, mid-drink, mid-conversation, and in that second you can hear, with horrible clarity, your own pulse pounding in your ears. Then the silence breaks into chaos, and chaos, you discover, has its own particular sound. Not screaming, not yet, but a low roar of chairs scraping back, glasses falling, fabric rustling as people grab coats they haven't checked, the piano player slamming the lid down over the keys as if that might somehow undo the music that already played tonight. Tante Magda's voice cuts through all of it like a blade. Second door! Through the kitchen now, calmly. Do not run in the alley. Walk like you've simply finished your supper. She's standing on a chair, one hand braced against a ceiling pipe, directing the flow of bodies with the same brisk authority she uses to direct the flow of bottles, and you understand, watching her, that she's done this before more than once, and that every single thing she taught you in the quiet hours before opening was preparation for exactly this moment. You run the routine. You don't think. There's no room for thinking, only for moving, and your hands find the pegs without your eyes needing to guide them. Years of memorized faces collapsing into pure muscle memory as you start unhooking coats 2 and 3 at a time, bundling them toward the second door, the one you didn't know existed until your third week here, hidden behind a false panel papered with the same playbills as the office, leading to a coal chute that opens onto a different alley 2 buildings over. The fist on the front door becomes something else now. A heavier blow, metal against wood, a battering ram or a fire axe. You can't tell which, and don't have time to wonder. The iron plate that Tante Magda installed specifically to slow this exact moment is doing exactly what it was built to do, buying seconds that feel, right now, more valuable than anything you've ever owned. A woman near you, older, well-dressed, the kind of customer who's never once given you her real name in 4 months of taking her coat, grabs your arm hard enough to bruise. Her face has gone the colour of old paper. "My husband," she says, the words tumbling out of her in a rush. "If my name appears anywhere, if this is in a paper, my husband will—" Second door, you say, because there's nothing else useful you can tell her, and you physically turn her by the shoulders toward the kitchen, toward the false panel, toward whatever life she's trying to protect on the other side of tonight. She goes. You don't watch to see if she makes it through. There isn't time. There's a line of people behind her, all needing the same push toward the same narrow exit. The front door gives. You hear it more than see it, a crash of splintering wood and tearing hinges, and then voices, many voices, official and shouting, and the megaphone again, closer now, ordering everyone to stand still, to produce identification, to stop moving toward any exit immediately. Half the room is already gone, through the kitchen, down the coal chute, scattering into the dark of the second alley the way Conrad drilled it, walking, not running, dispersing in different directions the moment they hit open air, so that no single observer could ever describe a crowd, only individuals going about individual business. But half the room is still here, frozen between the door they can't reach and the chairs they were sitting in moments ago, and you are still here too, because Tante Magda is still here, still standing on her chair, and you are not, under any circumstances you can imagine, going to leave through that coal chute while she remains in this room. The first uniforms come through the wrecked doorway like water through a broken dam. 4 of them, then 6, batons out, and behind them, in plain clothes that you recognize with a lurch as belonging to a face you've memorized over months of careful watching, comes a man you've never seen inside this particular cellar before, but whose boots, regulation, unmistakable, exactly as Conrad taught you to spot them, tell you everything you need to know about who he really is and how long he's likely been circling this neighborhood, learning its rhythms the same patient way you learn them yourself. Everyone remains where they are, he announces, and his voice carries the particular flat satisfaction of a man enjoying his work. Names, papers, anyone found without identification will be detained for questioning. What follows is not quick, and it is not clean, and there is no single dramatic moment you can point to afterward and call the worst of it, because the worst of it is the whole slow hour that follows. Uniformed men moving table to table, demanding papers, writing names into notebooks with the unhurried thoroughness of men who know nobody in this room is in a position to object. You watch the tall man who always sits near the piano, a regular for as long as you've worked here, stand with his hands trembling at his sides while an officer copies his name letter by letter, asks his occupation, asks where he lives, asks with a small, deliberate cruelty whether his employer knows where he spends his Friday evenings. You watch the singer who came tonight for the free pleasure of an honest audience get questioned twice, once by the man with the regulation boots, and once by a uniformed sergeant who seems to recognize her from somewhere else entirely, his expression sliding from professional blankness into something closer to contempt. You watch Conrad, dragged in from the bakery doorway where he was supposed to be your warning system, get shoved against the wall hard enough that you hear the breath go out of him, his 70-year-old body folding slightly before he straightens it back up through sheer stubbornness, his missing fingers pressed flat against the wall for balance. And you watch Tante Magda, who has not moved from beside her chair this entire time, who has not raised her voice once, who has stood through every minute of this with the particular stillness of someone who decided, long before tonight, exactly how she intended to behave if this night ever came, finally step down and walk, unhurried, toward the man giving the orders. "This is my establishment," she says, not loud, not pleading, simply a fact delivered the way she might tell a customer the price of a drink. "I'll give you my name and my papers, and you can write down whatever you like about me. These people came here for an evening's entertainment, nothing more, and most of them have done nothing tonight that any court in this city could actually prove was a crime. Whatever you'd like to believe about why they came." The officer looks at her for a long moment, and something in his face shifts. Not quite respect, but a recognition, perhaps, of a kind of authority that doesn't bend simply because a uniform is standing in front of it. "Your name," he says. "Magda Steiner," she says, and gives it without flinching, the way she's clearly given it before to other officers in other raids, across however many years she's been doing exactly this. Standing between the law and the people who came to her cellar for an hour of being unafraid. In the end, 11 people are taken that night, loaded into a police wagon parked at the mouth of the alley, while a small crowd of frightened neighbours watches from behind curtained windows up and down the street, careful not to be seen watching. The tall man from beside the piano is one of them, so is the singer. Tante Magda is questioned for nearly 40 minutes, and then, to your disbelieving relief, released, on the grounds, she tells you later, her hands shaking for the first time you've ever seen, that running a tea room isn't strictly illegal, only certain things that might or might not happen inside one. And the officer in charge apparently decided he didn't have grounds tonight to prove any of those things had actually occurred, whatever his suspicions. You're not questioned at all. You're 19, dressed like staff, holding an armful of coats that nobody bothered to claim before the chaos started, and in the eyes of the man with the regulation boots, you are simply furniture, exactly the way Tante Magda told you, on your very first night, that you were never supposed to be looked at, only to make sure everyone else could be. You stand in the wreckage of the front room afterward, overturned chairs, a shattered glass nobody's swept up, the gold-painted pipes overhead still strung with paper lanterns that somehow survived the whole ordeal undamaged. And you understand, with a clarity that feels like cold water down the back of your neck, that something has ended tonight, even though the building itself is still standing. Not the cellar. The cellar will likely reopen in some form, in some altered version of itself, the way it has reopened before, Tante Magda tells you, through other raids in other years. But something in you has ended. The particular innocence of believing that careful rules and coded knocks and a trusted ledger taped beneath a bar could keep a room full of people permanently safe from a city that, underneath all its electric light and brass and gin, has never fully decided it wants them to exist at all. The cellar stays closed for 9 days. Tante Magda spends most of that time on the telephone in a neighbour's shop 2 streets over, since she trusts her own line about as much as she trusts a policeman's promise, calling lawyers she knows from years of careful friendship, calling the families of the 11 people taken that night, calling, eventually, a contact of Hutmacher's, who confirms in a voice Hutmacher himself relays second-hand with visible discomfort, that 9 of the 11 will likely be released within the week with nothing worse than a fine and a formal warning attached to a name now sitting in a police file somewhere, waiting. The other 2 are not so fortunate. The tall man who used to sit beside the piano loses his position at the bank where he's worked for 11 years. The news of his arrest reaching his employer through channels nobody can quite trace, though everyone suspects the new district commander has friends in places that find this sort of leaked information useful. He doesn't come back to the cellar after it reopens. You hear, second-hand, weeks later, that he's left Berlin entirely, gone to live with a sister in Hamburg who apparently doesn't ask the questions his employer did. You think about him sometimes, hanging coats on peg number 9, which used to be his peg and which nobody has claimed since. The cellar reopens on a Tuesday in late January, quieter than before. The gold-painted pipes scrubbed clean of smoke residue, the shattered glass long since swept away. But something in the room itself feels different now, a wariness underneath the warmth that wasn't there in October. Tante Magda changes the knock. 5 taps now instead of 3, pause 2. A new rhythm for a new chapter, she calls it, though you can hear, underneath the brisk practicality of her voice, exactly how much that night cost her in ways that have nothing to do with the money. She also, without any particular announcement, starts trusting you with more. It happens gradually, the way most real changes do. You're given a key to the second door, the false panel and coal chute, which you didn't have before, on the theory, she explains, that if it happens again, somebody other than her needs to be able to operate every exit, not just watch them. You're taught the new bribe arrangement with Hutmacher's replacement. Hutmacher himself transferred out of the district in February. Whether by his own request or someone else's, nobody quite knows. And you're the one who delivers the envelope now every second Thursday, walking the route with a wariness you didn't have in October, but a confidence you didn't have then either. You've changed, Ernst tells you one evening, watching you lace your boots before a shift, in the same unhurried tone he might use to comment on the weather. 4 months ago, you flinched every time a door slammed somewhere in this building. Now you barely look up. Is that a good thing? He considers it, genuinely considers it, in the way he considers most things. I think it's just a thing. Not every change is good or bad. Some of them just are. He pulls his own boots on, ready for his own shift at his own establishment, in his own corner of this same fractured, beautiful city. You're not the boy from Breslau anymore, though. Whatever you are now, that boy's mostly gone. You think about that for a long time after he leaves, sitting alone in the narrow room above the print shop, listening to the presses below thudding out tomorrow's headlines, whatever those headlines turn out to be. He's right, you decide, though it takes you longer than it probably should to admit it even to yourself. The boy who arrived with 1 suitcase and 11 Reichsmarks and no idea what paragraph 175 even stood for has been replaced, slowly and without any single dramatic moment you could point to, by someone who can read a room of frightened strangers in the time it takes to walk through a door, who knows the weight and feel of fear well enough to recognize it in someone else's face before they've said a single word, who has learned, the hardest possible way, that safety in this city is never a permanent thing you arrive at and stay inside of, only a fragile arrangement you maintain night after night, with your whole attention, knowing it could be taken from you at any moment by people who've decided your existence is itself the crime. Tante Magda tells you one slow night in February, while polishing the same glasses with the same tired cloth, that she's been doing this in one form or another for nearly 20 years, through every kind of government this city has tried on like a series of ill-fitting coats, and that she has never once in all that time stopped being afraid on the nights the knock comes wrong. But I keep opening that door anyway, she says, because the alternative is letting the fear win before anyone's even knocked. And I'm not interested in handing them that particular victory for free. You think about the man on the radio tower, the old soldier with his enamel pin, telling you that the city's troubles look smaller from up there, that an hour of breathing room is not nothing when the rest of your week doesn't allow for it. You think he and Tante Magda would probably understand each other if they ever met, two people who have each found their own particular way of carrying impossible weight without setting it down, because setting it down was never actually an option either of them was given. Spring comes slowly that year, the way it always does in this city, the ice on the canals breaking up in dirty grey chunks before the first real warmth arrives, the chestnut trees along the wider boulevards putting out their first green weeks before anyone quite trusts the cold has actually finished with them. The cellar fills back up slowly, regulars returning one by one, new faces appearing too, drawn by word passed carefully from mouth to mouth, the way word has always travelled through this particular corner of the city, since long before you arrived and likely long after, you'll have moved on to whatever comes next. You don't know, this particular spring, everything that's still coming for this city and everyone in it. You don't know how short the remaining years of this fragile freedom actually are, how soon the brown shirts handing out pamphlets on street corners will become something far larger and far more organised, how completely this whole careful world of carnations and coded knocks and gold-painted pipes will eventually be erased, not by a single raid, but by something far more total and far more permanent. Nobody standing in that cellar in the spring of 1930 knows precisely how little time remains. Though Tante Magda, watching the newspapers with her cigar unlit between her fingers some evenings, seems to feel its shape approaching the way old sailors feel weather in an aching joint, long before the storm itself arrives. But that's not tonight's story. Tonight, the cellar is warm, and the piano's being played properly for once, and you're standing by the coat pegs doing the only job you've ever really had in this city, which is making sure that everyone else, for just a few hours, gets to be exactly who they are. Later, much later, after the last coat has been returned and the last unsteady customer walked safely into a cab, you climb the stairs above the print shop and let yourself into the small room where Ernst is already asleep, his breathing slow and even on his side of the narrow bed you share without either of you ever finding it strange. You lie down without undressing fully, too tired tonight to bother with anything beyond your boots, and you stare up at the water-stained ceiling while the presses below finally fall silent, the building settling into the particular quiet that only comes once the machines have stopped and the city outside has thinned down to its smallest hours. It's strange, the person you've become. Not the boy from outside Breslau anymore, not entirely, though you can still feel him in there somewhere, the one who flinched at every unfamiliar sound and got lost twice, in his first week trying to find a street that turned out to be 3 minutes' walk from where he started. He's quieter now, smaller, still present, the way a foundation is still present underneath the building that's grown taller than anyone expected, but no longer the one standing at the door deciding whether to knock. Your mother would barely know you if she saw you now, though you suspect, somewhere underneath the parts of her that agreed with your father, She might also be a little proud of the way you've learned to survive in a city that swallows so many people whole. Your father would simply look away, the way he always did, and you've stopped mostly letting that particular absence cost you sleep. The candle on the windowsill burns down to almost nothing, the flame guttering in a small draught that finds its way through the gap beneath the sash, and you watch the shadows it throws lengthen and waver across the ceiling, slower now, your eyes heavier with every passing minute. You think about the people you've met this year. Tante Magda with her boxer's shoulders and her unlit cigar, and her 20 years of opening doors she knows could close on her at any moment. Conrad, 70 years old, missing 2 fingers, hearing sharp enough to save a room full of strangers from a danger they never saw coming. The old soldier on the radio tower, telling you the city's troubles look smaller from 100 meters up, even if they never actually shrink. The man in the grey hat who sold you warnings for an envelope of money, and the man with the unlit cigarette who tried to sell your silence back to you for considerably more. The tall man from beside the piano, gone now to a sister in Hamburg, his peg standing empty, waiting for nobody. All of them living their separate lives inside this same enormous contradictory city. A city that builds radio towers tall enough to touch the clouds, and also builds laws designed to put people exactly like you behind bars for the simple crime of wanting what you want. A city that fills its coffee houses with newspapers and its cellars with carnations and its streets, after dark, with both kindness and cruelty in roughly equal measure, depending entirely on which corner you happen to be standing on when the night decides which face to show you. You've been lucky, you think, drifting now, the words coming slower, looser, less like sentences and more like the soft edges of a dream beginning to form. A good tante, a careful door, hands quick enough and eyes sharp enough to learn the routine before the routine was ever truly tested. Not everyone who walked through that iron-plated door this year can say the same. Not everyone got to walk back out of it. You're tired enough, tired enough, tired enough. You have a roof, and a roommate breathing steady beside you, and a coin or two saved in a tin beneath a loose floorboard, and people who would notice now, if you simply stopped showing up. That's more than the boy from Breslau had when he stepped off the train with 1 suitcase, and no idea what the city intended to make of him. That's enough. Let it come then. Let sleep take you the way it's taken this whole exhausted city, district by district, lamp by lamp, until even the latest tavern finally bolts its door and the last drunk finds his way home or doesn't. Let the noise of the presses below fade entirely. Let the candle finish its last inch of wax and go dark on its own, without you needing to lift a hand to snuff it. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop circling. Tomorrow there will be coats to hang, and a knock to listen for, and an envelope to carry through streets that know your face now, for better and for worse. Tomorrow there will be a city still deciding, in ways too large for any one cellar to control, exactly how much longer this particular fragile freedom is going to be allowed to last. But that's tomorrow. Right now, there's only this. The softness of an old mattress that felt like luxury the first week, and feels like home now. The quiet of a room above a print shop that smells faintly of ink even through closed doors. The steady, ordinary breathing of someone who trusts you enough to sleep beside you without a second thought. Centuries from now, the city below your window will have changed beyond anything you could imagine tonight. The cellar with no name will be gone, the door it hid behind torn out or burned or simply forgotten, the carnations and the coded knocks lost to a silence so complete that someone someday We'll have to go looking through old letters and old fears just to remember any of it happened at all. The tower you climbed in October will still be standing, taller buildings rising up around it until it no longer dominates the skyline the way it did the day you and Ernst rode the trembling lift to the top. The fear that drove men like the one with the unlit cigarette will take new shapes, wear new uniforms, find new words for the same old cruelty. But somewhere, in some new cellar with some new password, people will still be finding each other in the dark, still risking a knock at an unmarked door for the simple, stubborn hope of being known, still needing, at the end of whatever version of this city they happen to be living in, the particular rest that comes only after a day finally fully ends. That doesn't change. The need for it doesn't change. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took a boy named Felix in a narrow room above a Berlin print shop, a long time ago now, in a city that didn't always deserve him, but that he loved anyway. The way you sometimes love the most difficult, most beautiful, most dangerous places simply because they're the ones that taught you who you actually are. Let the world fade. Let the noise quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've earned this rest. Take it. Buenas noches. Good night.